After my wife's passing, my daughter-in-law told me, "This house is ours now. You can take the garage." I didn't argue. I just walked into my study and handed her the papers. She collapsed on the spot. The house was very quiet after the guests left. The kind of quiet that makes the walls sound hollow and the ticking clock sound like a hammer in a deep valley. And before I tell you what I did next, I want you to do something for me. Write in the comments where you are watching from, because I want to know how far this voice can travel and how many doors it can knock on tonight. And maybe your city or village or street will remind me that the world is still wide even when a home feels small, because my world had just shrunk to the size of a single room and a single breath. I was still in my black suit from the funeral, and my hands smelled like the soap from the church bathroom, and my shoes held dust from the cemetery road, and my son stood by the living room door with his shoulders stiff, and his wife stood beside him with her chin lifted a little higher than usual, and she looked at the photos on the wall like a person in a shop looks at items on a shelf. She cleared her throat in that way people do when they believe they are about to say something wise, and she said very slowly, so I would not miss a word, that this house was theirs now and I could take the garage. And the words rolled across the carpet heavy and cold, and I felt the chill in my chest like winter had walked in without knocking. I did not argue. I did not ask for patience or mercy or sense. I only nodded and turned away and walked down the hallway where my wife once taped our son's drawings, and the tape marks are still faint near the baseboard, and I pushed open the door to my study, and the smell of old paper and furniture polish and the faint sweetness of her lilies met me like an old friend with a simple question. Are you ready to be calm now? I sat in the chair by the window because that is where I always sat when I needed to think without the noise of my own fear, and I let the afternoon light rest on my sleeves, and I looked at the green chair opposite me where my wife used to knit. She liked to knit in the late hours, when the house was sleepy, and the dog next door barked at nothing, and the radio whispered a song that made the night feel friendly rather than empty. She would press a ball of yarn in her palm like a small peach, roll it once, loop the thread over the needle, and hum a line from a song she never finished. And I would pretend to read the paper, but really I would watch her hands, because those hands taught me how to hold worry without letting it bruise me. I remember her voice telling me to be tidy with papers, to put important things where panic could not reach them, to use a simple system and spare words and double checks, because someday we might need a clean line to follow through a messy moment. I remember the day she told me to keep a key on a ribbon under the drawer, and I laughed and said she was turning our study into a detective's office. And she laughed back and said better a detective's office than a thief's playground. The memory warmed me like tea. I turned to the desk with slow hands, slid the drawer open, felt the neat resistance of things that have not been disturbed in a long time, and saw the brown envelope resting in the center like a button at the heart of a coat. From the hallway, I heard my daughter-in-law moving. Sharp steps in high heels, a sound that did not belong to our floors yet tried to claim them. And I heard my son give a soft answer that did not carry any weight. And I thought of the many times I had carried his sleeping body from the car to his bed, his cheek damp from a long nap, his eyelids fluttering with some easy dream. And I asked myself when the weight of my son had moved from my arms to my heart. It happened slowly, the way spring turns into summer, and perhaps I did not notice the day it became heavy. I held the envelope and did not open it yet. I allowed the past to walk through me, the late nights with unpaid bills, the time the boiler flooded the basement, the frozen fingers while we cleaned it, the bowl of noodles we shared while sitting on boxes because the sofa had not yet arrived, the way she rubbed my shoulder and said we would laugh about this later, and we did, and the way our boy ran in the yard yelling that this was our house forever. And I believed him because the word forever in a child's mouth sounds like a bell that will ring without stopping. I thought of the day we paid the last mortgage check and she cried into my hands, and I thought of the afternoon she sold the bracelet her mother left her, and how light her wrist looked after, and how she smiled at me anyway and said it is only metal. This is a home. And I learned then the difference between what shines and what holds. When I walked back to the dining room, she was spread out like a designer, laptop open, notebook open, pen tapping, and she had written a list at the top of the page that said house changes, and under that she had written walls, floors, cabinets, and a note that said, "Remove old man's clutter." And she did not seem ashamed of the words because they were not meant for my eyes, or perhaps she did not care if I saw them. And my son stood with his hands in his pockets, body tilted away like a tree in wind, and I wondered if he would stand straight again. She looked up and told me we should label our food so there would be no confusion, and that I should not expect to join their dinners because a young couple needs privacy, and that I could use the garage or maybe the shed if I had to keep things that did not serve the new look of the home. I listened without interruption because there are moments when interruption only confirms the smallness someone wants for you, and silence is a taller wall than any argument can build. I said I would be right back, again in that flat voice that sounds like it belongs to someone who will not be moved, and I returned to the study with my step steady and my heart learning how to be still on command, like a good dog. I opened the envelope and touched the papers my wife and I prepared years ago, not because we feared our son, not because we suspected betrayal, but because we understood the speed of greed when it finds open ground, and we wanted our love to be stronger than anyone's hurry. We kept the house in our names alone, with simple language and clear signatures and witnesses who did not know our family but knew their role, and we locked the proof where calm hands could find it. The envelope felt like a lighthouse. I thought of walking out and slamming it on the table and shouting, but shouting belongs to fire and smoke and a hunger to be seen, and I did not want to feed that hunger in myself or in them. I wanted something clean. I waited for the right breath, and then I carried the envelope the way a person carries a candle through a dark room. Upright, careful, and without fear of the dark, because light cannot be afraid of what it answers. When I set the envelope on the notebook that said house changes, my daughter-in-law smiled like she expected a signature to surrender inside it. And she pulled the flap, and her eyes began to move, and her face changed the way a sky changes when a storm burns off by surprise, quick and pale and very clear. And she sat down without thinking and said one soft word that was actually two. No and oh, mixed together the way grief and shame sometimes mix in the mouth. My son reached for the papers like a thirsty man reaches for water he is not sure he deserves, and he read, and the house became very quiet again, but not the funeral quiet, not the helpless quiet, a different quiet, the quiet that comes when a rule finally says its full name. He looked at me then with the eyes I remembered from long ago, the eyes that asked me to explain how kites could fly and why rain falls and where light goes at night, and he asked why I had not told him. And I told him because it was not a weapon and not a threat and not a prize. Only a promise kept between his mother and me. And we never meant to use it to hurt him, but we would use it to protect the meaning of home if we had to. And today we had to. Her parents arrived the next day with voices ready for a courtroom and brows shaped like arrows. And I served tea in the good cups because I cannot forget who I am simply because someone else forgets who they could be. And the father read the copy of the paper and cleared his throat and left without his lecture. And the mother looked at the rugs like they might tell her a secret, and then followed him to the car. My son walked into the study in the afternoon and stood in the doorway like a boy with a broken window and no plan. And he said he was sorry in a voice that felt honest. And I told him to begin with the truth and stay with it longer than he stayed with convenience. And he sat in the green chair where his mother used to sit. And he looked very young in that chair. And we were quiet together in a way that felt like work, not avoidance. On the third day, she came to the study with her bag in her shaking hand and said she had been taught to take security before someone else did. And she had confused grabbing with earning. And she had confused speed with wisdom. And I told her that confusion is common, but it is still our job to clean it up. And she nodded and left the room with her head a little lower, but her steps a little softer. I did not change the 7 days I had given them to move. Mercy is not the same as forgetting the line. Mercy works best when it stands inside the line and does not wander. They packed in silence and talked in whispers and apologized in short sentences that did not ask for praise, and I accepted each apology without performance. On the 7th day, they stood with boxes by the door, and my son hugged me as if he were trying to pull something back into himself that he had thrown away by accident. And I told him to go and build a place where his word was the first tool he used each morning, and he nodded with wet eyes. She thanked me for not shouting when I could have, and I said, shouting is for people who are afraid they will not be heard, and truth has its own volume. They left, and the house let out a breath I had not noticed it was holding, and the rooms felt like they were looking at me without judgment, only with that mild attention that furniture gives to the person who has dusted it for years. I walked the hallway and straightened the frames and opened the window above the stairs and let the smell of the lake and the pine settle in the corners. And I wiped the dining table where so many plates had rested and so many stories had sat down with them. And I put the kettle on because care is a habit as much as it is a feeling. And I sat at the head of the table and placed the envelope down one last time before returning it to its drawer. Because victories should be simple and not parade through the house like noisy guests who overstay their welcome. I took my wife's photo from the dresser and set it by the fireplace, and I told her with my eyes and my breath that I had kept the promise we made, that the home remained a home, that our son had not been lost, only turned around in a fog, and that perhaps he would find the old path again now that the fog had lifted a little. I told her that love is not weak for being gentle, and that gentleness can outlast a storm without cracking, and I told her I missed her voice even when I could hear it perfectly inside my chest. That night I slept for the first time in a week without waking at every small sound. In the morning I watered her plants and found new leaves on the one near the window, and I smiled at the bold green of them, and I whispered to them the way she used to, and it felt silly and holy at the same time, and I think she would have laughed with that soft laugh that made every room better. I swept the porch and fixed the loose hinge on the pantry door that she used to nag me about. And while I worked, I thought about justice and how people love to describe it as a hammer. But I think sometimes justice is a key that turns without applause, and the door opens and light enters, and nobody claps because the right thing looks quiet from far away, even though it is loud in the heart. I made a sandwich and ate it standing up and felt the house notice me. And yes, I know walls cannot notice, but if you have lived long in one place, you understand the way a home can look back. In the days after they left, I began a small ritual that helped me understand the house again. Because houses change shape when the number of voices inside them changes, and silence has to be taught how to behave. Each morning I walked from room to room and greeted the first light as it slid along the floor. And I ran my palm across the banister as if it were the shoulder of an old friend. And I opened the front door for 5 minutes to let the outside listen in. I brewed coffee in the old pot with the crack in its handle and took it to the porch and watched the street wake up. And I remembered the morning years ago when our son learned to ride his bicycle without training wheels. How he fell 3 times, how he refused to cry the 4th, how your mother clapped with her hands near her face, like a girl who had seen a miracle. I took that memory and placed it on the mantel beside her photo, not in a frame but in the air, and I told myself that grief is heavy when you resist it, and lighter when you carry it openly on your shoulder for a while. I found the sweater they gave me on my birthday, the used one, and I carried it to the donation box. And I smiled because now the sweater could be warm to someone who wanted it, and I would not carry its message any longer. I sorted tools in the garage and lined them on the pegboard, and the hammer looked like it had been waiting for this simple order to return. I swept the concrete floor and thought of the way my daughter-in-law had said the word garage, as if it were a place where dignity goes to shrink, and I decided that no room is small if your work inside it is honest. I fixed the squeak at the back door and oiled the hinges on the study window. I repaired a loose tile in the kitchen and changed the light above the sink. And each small fix made a sound in me like a note in a simple song. And the song was called This Is Still Your Life. Sing it. One afternoon I walked to the lake and stood on the dock where we took that photo. The one where the boy sat on my shoulders and your scarf covered your neck twice. And the sky was the shade of steel that keeps secrets. And I could feel the dock move a little under my shoes, and I told the water what had happened. Because water understands how to hold sorrow and then release it, and the wind brushed my ear like fingers. And I remembered how you used to say that the lake always smells like a second chance. I stayed until the light turned the surface into dull silver. And then I went home and cooked rice with garlic and peas the way you taught me. And I ate it with a spoon like a child because sometimes the smallest comforts work better than the grand ones. I washed the pot and let it dry on the rack and set a fresh towel on the oven handle. And I felt something move inside me that was not grief and not relief, something simpler, something like standing up straight after a long bend. On Friday evening, the doorbell rang and I opened it to find my son holding a bag of groceries and a pack of screws. And behind him, a quiet apology that did not ask for anything. We stood on the porch for a moment that felt like an hour, and then we hugged. And then we did not speak about the papers or the list or the 7 days. We spoke about the porch rail. We spoke about the kind of screws that hold better under weather. We spoke about how the winter will be heavy this year. We made tea and stood in the kitchen, and he told me about the bakery and the old man who plays chess outside of it. And I told him about the boy with the stick and the singing neighbor. And our voices found the old rhythm they had lost. Not the rhythm of always agreeing, but the rhythm of paying respectful attention. He fixed the rail, and then he fixed the handle on the closet. And then he replaced the bulb in the hallway without being asked. And I watched him from the study door, and thought that work is a kind of language some people forget until tools are placed in their hands again. Before he left, he asked to sit in the green chair for a minute. And he did. And he looked at your photo. And he said, I know she would be angry with me. And I said, she would be angry at what happened, but she would still set a plate for you. And he nodded and pressed his lips together, as if he were learning how to carry both truths at once. He took the empty tea mug to the sink and washed it without a word, and the small sound of porcelain under water felt like a blessing I did not deserve but accepted anyway. At the door he said, I am learning. And I said, good, keep learning. And he said, I will. And then he went down the steps with a steadier step than he had when he arrived. After that, we began a new pattern, one that did not erase the hurt but did not feed it either. He would come by on Sundays with a bag of fruit or a coil of wire or a new box of nails, and we would fix something together. And then we would sit and eat simple food. And sometimes he would ask about stories from when he was small, and I would tell them in plain words, and I would try not to tilt him into nostalgia because nostalgia can be a slippery floor. But I would also not deny the goodness of what we once had, because goodness deserves to be named if it is to live beyond the room where it began. We did not speak about moving back. We did not speak about ownership. We spoke about responsibility and care and attention and time, and we knew that each of those words would do their quiet work if we gave them space. One night I dreamed of you. You were humming again, not a full song, just a line, and you were turning a page of a book and smiling at a sentence you had read 5 times and still loved. And you looked up at me and said, protect what we built. And I said, I did. And you said, now protect who we raised. And the dream ended, but the line did not. I woke with the feeling that a small lamp had been left on in a far room, and I followed the soft light to the kitchen and poured a glass of water and stood by the sink. And I promised you that I would do both protections as well as one man can, that I would keep the house strong and the path open, that I would not mistake control for care or pride for dignity or silence for cowardice. I promised to keep learning too, because the things we think we know sometimes grow old without our notice. You once said that a home is a school that does not close. I understand that now in a new way. The house taught me how to stand quiet without falling over. The study taught me how to sort paper from noise. The porch taught me how to welcome without surrender. The garage, yes, the garage, taught me how to give shame back its old name, which is only fear pretending to be law. The lake taught me how to let words go. The hallway taught me how to walk through history without getting stuck in it. Each room has a lesson if you enter it with the right questions. Each object has a soft voice if you lean close without rushing. Even the sweater taught me something before I let it go, that gifts can carry harm when they are given with contempt, and that it is wise to remove their message from your house as soon as you can, before the threads turn into a net around your heart. I have started writing down these lessons in a small notebook, the same brand you used to buy, with the thick lines and the stiff cover. I keep the notebook in the study drawer next to the envelope, not because they are equal, but because they both belong to the same duty. On the first page I wrote, dignity loves quiet rooms. On the second, speak when truth needs a mouth. On the third, hold the key like a candle. On the fourth, kindness is a wall that does not collapse. I do not know who will read these lines after I am gone, but I write them as if the reader will be our son on a difficult morning 20 years from now, needing a sentence to lean on. Perhaps he will read and remember the sound of your knitting needles, the soft clack that counted time better than the old clock ever did. Perhaps he will hear your voice drop a small joke into a heavy moment and see, How the weight lifts without anyone pretending it was not. Heavy. Sometimes I sit on the front steps and children from the block ride by on bicycles and scooters, and their parents call out warnings about the curb, and I lift a hand and wave. And I think about the day our boy learned to turn the corner without wobbling, and how he looked back to make sure we had seen it, and how his smile stretched so far it almost hurt to look at it. I want to tell every parent who passes my steps to catch their child's eye when the turn is clean, to nod and clap and name the moment, because later, when the house is quiet and the children are grown, the memory of that nod will be a beam in the ceiling, holding up the room where trust sleeps. We did not do everything right, you and I, but we clapped at the right turns, and that is no small thing. A neighbor asked me last week why the house feels calmer, and I told him the truth, because the rules are visible again. A home without visible rules invites invisible harm. Our rules are simple. We do not lie. We do not use love as a lever. We do not confuse money with meaning. We do not let guests rearrange the furniture in our hearts. We do not move elders to a cold corner. We do not call greed a plan. We do not call cruelty a joke. We eat together when we can. We wash our own dishes. We forgive slowly and properly. We apologize with our hands, not just our mouths. These rules are not written on the wall, but they might as well be because they live in what we do every day. They are the quiet laws that kept us standing, even when the wind tried its tricks. Tonight I will place your photo back on the dresser and turn off the lamp and let the dark be kind. And I will sleep with the window open a little to hear the night and to remind myself that the world is bigger than this plot of land. And yet this plot of land is the world to me. I will wake tomorrow and make coffee and open the door and greet the morning, and I will try to live like a man whose house is a gentle school. If you are still with me at the end of this long telling, write in the comments where you are watching from, and tell me one small rule your home taught you. And maybe we will gather these rules together like smooth stones and build a low wall that keeps out the kind of weather that ruins foundations. If this story gave you a steady breath, if it reminded you of a promise you still intend to keep, help it reach someone who needs it tonight. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. And tell me where you are watching from so I can picture your sky when I whisper my goodnight.